Hi everyone. So, in this video, we'll be learning about how the shifts in demand and shifts in supply that we learned about in the previous two videos, how those can actually affect our demand and supply model. That is, what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity in our demand and supply model if we see a shift in demand or a shift in supply. Um, so this will actually be the last video before our first exam. Um, so any other videos that might appear after this, of course, won't be showing up for our first exam. But let's go ahead and get started. The main thing that we're looking at is again, how does a shift in demand or supply affect the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in our demand and supply model. So, in order to analyze this question, we'll follow 4 steps. Okay, so anytime we are presented with a question like this, right, when we are given some kind of prompt that is asking us for how a shift in demand or supply might affect our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity, first things first is to draw an example demand and supply model that is on a graph. After that, we have to consider which curve is shifting. That is the demand curve or supply curve. Number 3, does it shift right? That is an increase, or left? That is a decrease. And then last but not least, draw the shifts and label the new equilibrium and compare. To the old equilibrium. Okay, so let's actually go through an example here to kind of show exactly what I'm talking about. So an example prompt you might see is something along the lines of, let's say, for whatever reason, um, more people have been diagnosed, diagnosed to be lactose intolerant. That is, they have difficulty digesting, dairy products. Then our question is, what happens as a result to the equilibrium, price and quantity of milk? Now, let's just analyze this using these steps here, just by following along with these steps. And the first step is, of course, to draw an example demand and supply. And what I mean by that is just like quickly doodle something here. It doesn't have to be neat. That's not really the point. Because as you can see, this example question is not asking about any specific numbers or anything. It's not asking about like, well, is there going to be a specific percentage of change or anything like that? That's not really what it's asking. So we don't really need to worry about that here. So I'll just quickly doodle a basic demand and supply graph, following along with our steps, right? This is our first step, is just to quickly doodle this thing right here. So price on the y-axis as usual, quantity on the x-axis, supply is the upward sloping curve, demand is downward sloping, where they cross is our equilibrium price and quantity. Okay, so that is step one, right? I just quickly doodled that in like 15 seconds, right? Very fast. Number two, consider which curve is shifting. Will it be demand or will it be supply? Well, in case I'm not immediately aware of this, then like if I'm not immediately aware of like, well, should it be demand or should it be supply, then I can just refer to my notes up here, right? Three things that cause a shift in supply. Does lactose intolerance impact cost of production? No. Change in taxes? No. Change in number of sellers? No. So let's go back up and see about these demand shifters. If one note will finish loading. Here we go. Well, that doesn't impact income really. That doesn't like there's no mention of another type of good, so it's not really talking about substitutes or complements. So it's not talking about this. It didn't mention anything about a change in the number of buyers. It didn't really change, cause any change in like expectations about the future. So, but it might have something to do with a change in tastes and preferences, right? Because if people are like diagnosed to be lactose intolerant, then of course people might want to eat a lot less dairy, or might want to stop consuming dairy products altogether. Or they might, do some other things as well. Maybe they'll take lactase supplements. But the main thing is like, well, people are more aware now that they are lactose intolerant, so they probably that will impact their consumption of dairy, right? Of dairy products. So scroll back down, and here we go. So we know that this is going to be a demand change then, right? Because that change in taste and preferences was listed under demand shifts. So we know it will be this demand curve that shifts. So since I know it's the demand curve that will shift, I'll go ahead and label this D0 or D0, because I know I'll have to draw a new demand curve either to the left or to the right here in just a second. So step 3 then is, now that I know it's the demand curve, right, that is going to be changing, is it going to be shifting to the right? That is, there's an increase in demand, or is it going to be shifting to the left? That is, will there be a decrease in demand? Well, naturally, with lactose intolerance and milk being a dairy product, there's probably going to be a decrease in demand for milk, right? That seems absolutely like the most logical thing that can happen as a result here. So I will go ahead and draw that change, right? This is a part of step 4 now, right? Draw the shifts and then label the new equilibrium and compare to the old one. So I'll go ahead and do that. Remember, it's a decrease to demand, which means we always want to move the curve to the left for a decrease, right? Moving a curve to the left is a decrease. And then I'll label this D1, right, for the new demand curve, right? Because we're going from 0 to 1, of course, right? We're ascending. And then, of course, here will be our new equilibrium because that is where our supply curve, right, crosses the demand curve, right? Because this demand curve has moved from D0 to D1, right? So this is the new demand curve that we're talking about. So where this crosses right here at this point is going to be our new equilibrium. And therefore, our new equilibrium quantity and price. Okay, so here off to the side, just for my own personal notes to make it a little bit easier to see, I note that price has decreased, right? Because started off at high level, went down to lower level. So equilibrium price saw a decrease, and equilibrium quantity likewise also saw a decrease, right? From Q0 down to Q1. So this is then my answer for the question of what happens as a result of the equilibrium price and quantity of milk when more people are diagnosed as lactose intolerant. This is what happens. This is the most logical answer. And if we think about it in practice, right? If we think about like what that would look like in real life outside of the graphs and all that kind of stuff, hopefully that logically still makes sense, right? Because obviously, if people find out they're lactose intolerant, they will probably want to, of course, consume less dairy products, including milk. Now, an important thing to consider here, right, is actually, and I don't want to muddy up this graph too much, so I will copy this and paste it down here because there's something extra I also want to show on this graph, but I don't want to like crowd it too much on this one graph up here that's already showing kind of like what the steps to take are for a question like that. An important thing to note here that I kind of want to point out is the reason why the price and quantity decrease, right? I want to make sure that the mechanism for why the price and quantity decrease here, the equilibrium price and quantity decrease, is very clear here. So when the demand curve shifts left because people find out they're lactose intolerant and so they don't want to consume as much dairy, including milk, compared to before, then if the store keeps charging this price of P star 0, P star not, right? Then note what's happening is that here, this point represents quantity supplied at this price, right? At this price, this is the quantity supplied right there, right? And this point right here on the new demand curve represents the new quantity demanded, right? Because the demand curve shifted from D0 to D1, so this D0 is like an out of date demand curve. It doesn't reflect the actual new level of demand for this product, right? So that's why we have to take a look at where the new demand curve is, D1 right here. And we can see here, this is the quantity demanded here now, right? Actually, that should be labeled 1, yeah. Because we're taking a look at the demand curve 1 here. So this is the new quantity demanded. So we can see here quantity supplied is bigger than quantity demanded, which, as we know from before, this means this is excess supply. Now, what do we remember about cases where there's excess supply of a product? Well, of course, the store that's selling this milk obviously doesn't like that, especially with a good like milk, right? Because what that means is there's like some extra kinds of milk that aren't being sold, and milk, of course, expires. It goes bad like pretty quickly. So if there's an excess supply of milk that a store can't sell, that's really bad because that means that they paid for, a bunch of extra cartons of milk that they didn't manage to sell. So they just wasted a bunch of money, and then that milk goes bad, and then they can't do anything with it, right? When it expires, then it's just like no good to anyone at that point, right? So what the store then does is they will start to lower the price, right, in order to try and make sure that they don't get an excess supply of milk next time, right? For like whenever they get their next shipment in, they want to make sure that they sell as much of it as possible to try and make sure that they didn't waste a bunch of extra money, right? So they might order less milk from their suppliers next time, right? But they'll also lower the price, which is why we see here price went down from P0 down to P1, and the equilibrium quantity also went down, right, from Q star 0 down to Q star 1. And uh, at this new equilibrium, there's no longer an excess supply, right, because this is the supply curve, this is the demand curve. They cross right here, meaning, quantity demanded is exactly equal to quantity supplied. So there's no longer an issue there, right? So that's mechanically how that works. Um, and the way that we analyze how all that happens is through this model, right? When we're given like a prompt like this, well, what should happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of something, when this thing up here happens? We break it down just like this. Steps 1 through 4, just follow them just like what we did here. And we should end up with a clear result of something happening to the equilibrium price and quantity. In this particular case, where we saw a demand decrease, it ended up being a price decrease and a quantity decrease. But it doesn't necessarily always work out that way. If it was a demand increase, it would be different. If it was a supply increase, it would be different still. And if it was a supply decrease, again, that would also be different. So, just make sure you break it down and analyze it in this way, and then you can figure out what the overall effect on the equilibrium price and quantity will be, as long as you follow along with these steps. And if you follow along with these steps for like another type of question, and if you analyze it mechanically like what we did here, you might end up seeing another case where there's an excess supply if the stores kept trying to sell it at the original price, right? Or you might see the opposite case happen, where if the store tried to keep it at the original equilibrium price, there would be excess demand instead. And then, of course, you would want to break it down in the same way here. What happens to the equilibrium price and quantity, and why, right? That part is also important. That's why I wanted to spend some time explaining this bit right here about mechanically why does the price change? Why does the quantity change? Well, it's because there's excess supply, right? And I walked you through the logic of what would actually be happening like in practice, right? But I could have asked the same question if there ended up being a case of excess demand as well. Okay, so yeah, I think that will be it for this video. Trying to keep this last one short because we do have an exam coming up, so I do want to allow you more time to study and to not put too much material all on at the same time. Um, for you to study just a few days before the exam. Um, so yeah, that will be it for this video. Good luck with your studying, and good luck on the exam. As usual, please feel free to send me questions, feedback, etc. If you have any. Okay.